Oh, Kevin, my goodness. Really thinking of you all. California, New York, Maryland, Massachusetts. Wow, okay, lots of states. Seattle. Gaithersburg, Foggy Bottom. We have good DC coverage. Herndon, love it. We needed Virginia. Thank you for joining, everybody. So, Corey, what do you think? Get started?
I think we're good to go.
Okay, fantastic. So, welcome everybody. Welcome to DC Startup Week, the virtual edition, our very first. We're so happy to have you with us. A few housekeeping items. First of all, my name is Amira El-Gawly. I am the founder and CEO of Manifesta, a workplace culture agency here in the district. I am coming to you from my living room and my everything room in DuPont Circle. I am the curator for the first ever DC Startup Week culture track, and I'm really, really excited about the people you're going to be meeting in a moment. DC Startup Week is a 5-day conference every September focused on building the startup community. We want to give a quick shout out to our title sponsors, Next, Insperity, WIS, and Technology Rivers. If you have any questions throughout this talk, use the chat function. And just so that we can find it, just put an all caps question in front of your question. We are so excited to introduce this panel. And before I do that, can you see my screen? Give me a thumbs up if you can. Amazing. Okay, thank you. So, Culture 2020, Reinventing Work, that's the theme of our track this week. We have 9 amazing sessions. This is session number 2. Please feel free to share on social media things you're loving, insights you learn. Let us have a ripple effect to the people we know and who follow us on the things that matter most this week. So here are some handles. Just tag us at DC Startup Week and at Manifesta Co. And use these hashtags. For those of you who are going to attend more than one session or really are interested in participating in the culture track, we've created a guide that has some really incredible content in there for you. So you can follow along, explore the entire program, and also you can take notes directly in the document while you're on your computer. So it's a great way to really track your learning and be present with us. So you can find that at manifesta.co/startupweek. All right, virtual drum roll. This session is one that I've been super excited for. The title of the session is Mind the Gap, Avoid Common Pitfalls of Startup Culture. I have worked at multiple startups, one tech startup and some other kinds of startups. And I have to say, if only I knew then what I knew now, it could have saved myself and many others a lot of pain and a lot of money and a lot of time. And so that's what this incredible group of people are going to be sharing with us today, moderated by the wonderful Lars Schmidt, who is the founder of Amplify, which is based in our area. It's an HR executive search and modern talent consultancy. Lars also covers modern people and work practices for Fast Company and has a podcast called Redefining HR. I discovered Lars kind of in the beginning of the COVID pandemic as I was trying to figure out what was going on and how best to serve my clients from a culture and leadership perspective. He was a kind of a beacon of truth and light in crisis on social media. And so that's how I discovered Lars. I'm so excited to have you, Lars, with us, and I'll let you introduce the panel.
Well, thanks so much for the introduction and for bringing us all together and for giving me some ideas to update my LinkedIn profile with a beacon of truth and light. That's wow, that's a special one. Thank you very much. So let's dig right in. We've got an incredible panel today. I'm so fortunate to be joined by three amazing people operators. And so let's just jump right in with introductions. So Mike, I'm gonna kick it over to you first. Why don't you give the viewers just a quick intro and background on you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Lars. Hey, everyone. My name is Mike Kohn. I'm the Chief People Officer at Marts and Lundy, which is a philanthropy consulting company. We help nonprofits with their fundraising strategy. I've been in HR and people space for my whole career across architecture and design, higher education, a little bit of federal consulting, and I spent a significant amount of time at a clean energy tech startup, as well as have been advising some startups across a couple of different spaces as well. So really excited for this conversation and looking forward to chatting with you all.
Cool. LaRae, how about you?
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is LaRae Holliday. I currently serve as the Global Head of Talent at EVERFI. We're a social impact education technology company headquartered in DC. So my role there, I'm really charged with thinking about the people, processes, and policies, and how those actually propel us forward as a business, not just meeting us in the moment and reacting, but how does that actually help us accomplish what we need to. I'm really excited to be on this panel. A great group of individuals. Prior to EVERFI, I was at Living Social. I've been at Palantir. So I've definitely had some lessons learned the hard way in some cases, and happy to share what some of those experiences have been.
Great. Thanks, LaRae. And last but certainly not least, Cristyn.
Thanks, Lars. Hi, everybody. I'm Cristyn Girolami. I'm with Upside Business Travel. I've been working in the people space for the last about 15 years or so. And I've been working with the same co-founders in a handful of different businesses, helping to build out the teams, which includes everything from culture to benefits to policies and procedures and that kind of thing. And I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Cool. So there's a lot for us to cover. We're going to be getting into failure. We're going to be getting into a lot of fun and meaty things. But before we do, I think anytime you're joining one of these sessions, it's cool to get somebody's bio and their kind of background on what they've done. But it doesn't necessarily give you a window into what they think and how they operate. So I want to start off with a brief lightning round to just help all of you get to know our operators just a little bit better. So we're going to maintain the same order because we got a good cadence there. Mike, you're up first. What is your least favorite HR buzzword?
Man, putting a lot of pressure on me to go first. I never like following directions, and so I won't use word, I'll use buzz phrase. I'm really sick and tired of hearing the seat at the table concept. Really find it annoying, kind of done with it.
Yeah, and for those of you that aren't in HR that you're watching, that's almost like an inside joke for us HR and people operators. Like, we love talking about the seat at the table, and people like us hate talking about the seat at the table, because the idea of the seat at the table is that HR doesn't belong in some way to the strategic contribution of the organization, and we have to fight for that validity, which is BS. And we know the impact we bring to the organization. There is an insecurity around seeking that seat at the table. We built the table. Let's go. So that's how I think we'll be looking at it from here.
And I'll throw it out there that because everyone is here, you already know the value of people in HR. So thank you for not making us with that.
All right, LaRae, you're on deck. Least favorite HR buzzword?
Yeah, if you would have asked me this a few months ago, it would be something different, but I have to put out there return to work. I just, it makes me, what are we returning to? When did work stop? It's just an interesting framing. We've even, leveraged the term return to office in our workspace, but then that also isolates our remote employees. So I don't know that I have a better framing of it. I think what we're positioning as like the future of work and how we reimagine it is really how we should be thinking about it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Cristyn, how about you?
Well, I don't mean to kind of blow up the word, but actually the words HR are my least favorite buzzword. So I'm more of a shifted into people or people team or people ops. And so I tend to stay more away from HR, but to each their own.
Yeah, I could live with HR. I don't love HR. We've got a long history in HR. I loathe human capital. Loathed it. Do not use human capital. If any of you are in HR, your department's in human capital, change that. Humans are not capital. Nobody wants to see themselves that way. Like, please, for the love
Very
of
fair.
Or
all
for
that is human, they're
retro
not capital.
personnel, if you will, if you want to take it back
What's
a few years. There's another good one.
Which one?
Personnel.
Oh, Percy, yeah. That's like the old school. That's taking it back to the origins. That's like version 1.0. All right, let's keep it going. Mike, lightning round. Favorite HR discipline?
So I think I would say organizational development, basically all things culture and engagement and helping to build an organization from the human side to what we were just talking about. People are not resources, they are human beings. And so how do you put all the pieces together and make sure that we're greater than the sum of our parts? I think that's the fun stuff.
All right. And LaRae, how about you?
Yeah, I'm going to take an interesting approach to this, and I'm going to say all of them. And that comes from me being a parent and acknowledging that you can't have favorites verbally in front of others, and also leading a team.
Watching?
No, potentially. No favorites here.
All right, fair. Cristyn, how about you? You can't dodge on that one either. I'm gonna take you down to one team, one function.
For me, it's talent acquisition. I think I've been really fortunate to do that as a big part of my role in a lot of the companies, but also been able to work with over the last few years, really strong partners who are great at talent acquisition. And if you're not able to build the team, you can't really do anything else with that. So you have to have awesome people from the get-go. So definitely
100%.
For me.
Cool. All right, we're gonna do the last lightning round question, and Cristyn, I'm actually gonna start with you. We're gonna swing it back the other way. And this, I think, was a good framing question for the rest of this session. The key, fill in this blank. The key to great HR is, or I'm sorry, wait, for you. The key to great people operations is.
Thank you. So I think it's setting the values and mantras or whatever you're calling that from the get-go. Don't bend on them, hire to them, and reinforce them often. I think that's really, for me, what's the most important at the start of it and how you get it moving.
Yeah. LaRae?
Yeah, I would say for me, the key to great HR is not really seeing people and organizations as something that are broken and need to be fixed or policed as an HR function, but really seeing the potential and looking at ways in how your department can unlock that potential and remove barriers. So that's what I think is the secret to actual great people operations.
Cool. And Mike, we're going to bring it back to you to close out the lightning round.
Sure. So I think the key to a great HR or people ops practice or human capital practice, if you will, is linking the macro understanding of the way an organization and the business works with the individual people that are working within it. And so bringing that business knowledge linked with empathy and emotional intelligence.
Cool. Well, let's dig in. Let's open with failure. Failure is always a fun topic. The idea of this panel is to help startups and founding teams avoid some of the common pitfalls that we've all experienced, that we've all seen firsthand as people operators. And I want to touch on one to kind of open up with, because I think that this is, to me, what I see as probably being one of the most recurring mistakes that startups make. When you're in the early stages of growth, it's all hands on deck on hiring. Right? You're entirely focused on hiring, recruiting, talent attraction, bringing people in the door, bringing, high caliber talent in the door. Very rarely are companies matching that with actually scaling their people infrastructure and their processes and focusing on, you've worked so hard to get these people. How do you retain them? Right? And so there's this disconnect between the focus on talent acquisition and not matching that with support on all the back-end systems and processes that need to retain and develop staff. So LaRae, I want to start off with you here. Obviously, I know you come from the talent acquisition side and recruiting side. You now have a broader scope now. What's your perspective on this? You've worked at, healthy growth. Anybody who's in the DC area knows the story of Living Social. They went through massive scaled growth and then contraction. What do you see as being the biggest pitfalls as it relates to over-indexing on recruiting and not matching that with the operations on the people side?
Yeah, that's spot on, and has certainly seen this play out in a number of scenarios. And I think what you're actually doing when you overweight on the recruiting aspect or the hiring aspect is you're actually setting your team up for more transactional interactions. as it relates to even hiring the right fit for your company. So if you think about this like necessary feedback loop that also has to happen on the retention and engagement side of what profiles are good profiles, if you're not in lockstep and have a unified team on recruiting and the HR side, you're gonna miss that information. Which is really important and really powerful. And I've certainly seen this, in multiple scenarios where really the size of the recruiting team is double, triple the size of the HR team. And I do think that's, one misstep that companies do in terms of just solely investing on talent acquisition and not actually thinking about the big picture full employee life cycle and being intentional about that.
Great. And Mike, how about you? I know you've got some experience here as well.
Yeah, there's a whole lot in this space about you don't know what you don't know. When you haven't been doing people and HR work for a long time, you end up on a path of, okay, well, I don't need it. It's just not that important. And one of the things I find is that a lot of people have sort of the buzzwords of things that you should do in your mind. We have to have a performance management process. And you end up focusing on the thing as the end goal instead of saying, why are we doing this system? What do we actually need for our people? Because a performance management system doesn't look the same at 5 people, at 10 people, at 50 people, at 100 people. So making sure that there is some sense of what do our people need and what's the best solution for our culture. You don't have to reinvent the wheel because a lot of people have done this, but making sure you actually know what is it about our culture that we want to continue to push forward. Oh, let's talk about development. We don't need this formal 500-person process for our 10-person team, and instead going back to what's the objective at the end of this and then working through it from that vantage point.
Yeah. And Cristyn, anything you'd want to add?
No, I mean, I think maybe just to add to Mike's comment, I think in a startup environment, you're able to really adjust on that. You're able to, if you're in a bigger environment, you can take what worked and you can say, okay, what's the feedback from the team? Do we think we need it? Do we not need it? And what does it look like? And how do we craft it to match that group of people so that it fits for them? So I think tailoring it is key.
Yeah. And Cristyn, I want to stick with you on the next question. I think when you're a startup, obviously money is tight. Budgets are very tight and you're trying to work within a set framework. And at times that can hurt you when it comes to competing for talent, especially in hot markets and hot talent. People have choices, they have options, they're getting wined and dined and having tons of money and equity and options thrown at them. So how do you overcome that fiscal rigidity that often is in place in early stage startups where they have an idea that is not necessarily even based on market of what a role should pay, and they get locked into that, and that's costing them talent. How do you overcome that?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest mistakes I made early on in one of the startups was being too tied to the budget and not being open enough to say, okay, let's just find the best talent and we'll figure out how to get that talent. And it was worth kind of giving up another position sometimes in order to do that. And so I think what I've learned from in making that mistake several times is find the best talent and be really competitive in the market, whether it's equity, whether it's salary, make sure we're paying above market where we can, make the market be the kind of baseline for that. That was a tough lesson to learn. And I think it was something that for me in the last couple of roles I've been in, I saw a big difference in the level of talent that we had. Even starting in the business, you had people that were more mid-level and senior than you did more junior talent. And so you get a wisdom and a knowledge there. You need both of those, but in the beginning, sometimes you need people with a little bit more experience as well.
Yeah. Well, I think also to that point, companies often, especially for early stage startups, they're usually, the HR team kind of evolves from within inside the organization. They're making the mistake, which is another big pitfall of not hiring a seasoned HR executive and operator early enough. And so you don't have somebody, again, with like your experience, and Cristyn, I imagine the relationships you have with the executive team that can actually push back and be like, look, I know you don't want to spend this, but this is market and this person's going to have a 3x impact than anybody else we're going to hire. So we've got to find the dollar somewhere, even if it means scrapping another role. So I'd love to get all of your perspectives, particularly for the audience that is maybe in an early stage startup or perhaps founding teams themselves. When's the right time to bring in a head of people, a seasoned people operator? Mike, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's a great question because I tend to think, and this is obviously selfish, the earlier the better. The thing about people and HR is that it takes a lot of investment to grow and build over time, and having someone who understands your business to be able to carry that forward from day one, codify your culture, codify your approach to leadership and strategy when it comes to something that is so central to the way your business is going to be running. Being able to do that from as close to day one as you can get it is incredibly important, because otherwise that person is sort of scrambling to figure out, how did we get here? Let me figure out the baggage that everyone is carrying. Let's undo some of the learned mistakes along the way. And instead you get to attempt to do it right. I'll use the word attempt there.
Yeah. LaRae, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100% what Mike said. It should be early on in the process. And I think if it's, you're resource constrained in terms of actually being able to bring someone in full time, considering a consultant, I think there are, knowledgeable people in this area who can certainly advise you on what missteps you don't want to take in this process. But it's pretty much you should think of this as one of your day one investments, especially, as if your desire is to really grow and be intentional about your business practices, you want to think about your people first and foremost.
Yeah. Cristyn, anything you want to add to that?
Sure. I mean, I think we're all slightly biased on this topic, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So yes, within that bias, I guess I would say, look, it's, unfortunately what happens is a lot of founders and starting teams don't realize how much time they end up spending on people. They start spending the bulk of their time on the human component of things, right? On retention, on hiring, on policy. And so, yeah, I mean, right at the get-go is ideal, because that's less that they have to do if you're going to sell it that way. But also, if you start it from the beginning with somebody in there, they can really carry through a lot of the things that they put in place from early on.
Yeah.
And maybe, Cristyn, if I may, as an add-on to that, with just the talent partnership, and it is a partnership, right? So not making the mistake of just hiring this person and then people are their problems. It's really thinking about how you do that in the spirit of being together and making sure that they're thinking about the business vision, your values, and tying that all together.
Yeah. And let's talk about that for a minute, because I think for attendees in the conference right now, the field of HR is a spectrum, right? You have, there's a massive delta between leading, transformative, proactive people teams that are true trusted advisors to the executive team, which hopefully is what all of you are hoping to build, and legacy oriented, again, personnel, human capital, these terms that we've made fun of earlier. That's also a very real sect. And I don't think you find that wing of HR is often in startups and growth, because it just can't keep up and you have to quickly upgrade. But I'm curious to get all of your perspectives. How would you kind of describe modern HR in modern people operations, I should say, in contrast with the legacy counterparts? And I'll just get quick answers on those. LaRae, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think it's definitely shifting from thinking about HR in its traditional form as being the policing function, or at the other end of the spectrum are just the culture carriers per se, in terms of these are the people who are just supposed to champion and have, make your culture or your environment fun and think about the perks. So really in the spirit of, as you're looking for, I think this question came up, your ideal people partner is someone who's going to really bring a holistic perspective to how they think about talent, how they think about partnering with you as a business. So they should also bring a business mindset as well, because it's also about how you drive performance, not just only thinking about making sure you have the right people practices in place as well.
Yeah. Mike, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, big ditto to everything that LaRae just said. I think that there is this need to really bring that focus on understanding the business acumen and all of the knowledge and details that comes with that, with an understanding of the psychology of how do people work, what motivates them, what understands them, and being able to link that together. I think where we've come from is HR as a compliance type of field. You're making sure that the business is protected, and people used to see it that way. No one wants to go to an HR function where the job of that person is to make sure that the CEO doesn't get called out for whatever infraction might have been. That's not helpful. How do you serve as that resource to actually developing the business and actually developing the people along the way. And that business piece is actually really critical. I've talked to a few people who said, I just love people so much. I think people are so great. I want to go be in HR. And I've said, maybe you should consider being a kindergarten teacher, because that is a really great place for that. And that's a skill set I do not have, but being able to understand the way people operate with the way the business works is critical.
And Cristyn, I'll get your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I think also to Mike's point, it's about understanding the business first and foremost. If you don't understand your core business, then you can't quite possibly be a partner, whether it's a partner to your leadership or a partner to your team, right? And I think, you know, LaRae made a really good point. I think we have to be a partner in this, and it's changing over time. There's still a lot of antiquated practices with HR, and you still see that. You know, you see it less in startups, which is awesome. And it's one of the reasons why I want to be part of a startup, because there's more openness and there's more acceptance and there's more individuality, right? Just even thinking about the teams and thinking about each person as an individual, and you're thinking about them holistically. It's also thinking about the individuals that you bring on in that way. So yeah, holistic is a good way, LaRae, of framing it. A nice word to use for how I see this.
You know, some questions, so I appreciate everybody who's adding some questions in the chat. We are going to have time for that at the end of this session. So we're going to cover as many of those as we can. I'm going to cheat and cover kind of partially one of them now. There's a question that came in around what you should look for in a HR talent advisor, but I'm going to tweak that a little bit and actually say, so for CEOs out there that are thinking about hiring a head of people, a chief people officer, because I think some of these traits will actually overlap. What traits should they be looking for? How do you know what kind of a people leader is going to be best suited for startup leadership? Cristyn, I'll start right back with you.
Sure. So I think this person can come from varied backgrounds. I think a general background or an interest in having, you know, not being very specific is important, because really you do wear a ton of hats. Like, you're doing all different things, and there's exposure in all areas of the business. So I think somebody who's flexible and being able to attack all different things, somebody's had some experience maybe doing that. And then personality wise, you need somebody who's hungry, who's open, who works quickly, who's transparent, fun. Those are the things I think of.
LaRae, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with everything that Cristyn also said. I don't know that you necessarily have to, you know, be, how many people grow up and say that they want to be in HR? I think that's very rare, right? Most people kind of fall into it by accident. My background, I was a psychologist by training and always had a passion for people. So, you know, I think that concept of what also Mike was saying, for people who also get a bit of the psychology and understand the motivation and drive, because ultimately, as a business, that's what you're really trying to capitalize on, is once you have people, you know, how you're actually leveraging your people in a smart and productive way.
Okay. And Mike, we'll close you out on that question.
Yeah, and for sake of argument, I was a Spanish literature major in college, so, you know, I can safely say this is not where I thought I'd end up. But you know, I think echoing LaRae and Cristyn with everything that they said, I think as a business founder, as an executive, the most important piece when looking for a people partner is, what is the complement that you need to make your business successful? Because, you know, what I bring personally around emotional intelligence, if you're a founder who has that already, you might need something different from your people partner, but being introspective and reflective to say, who am I? What are the skills I need to balance me out? And I've worked with multiple CEOs who said, yes, I do not see the individual people. I see the macro lens. I see the overall business and our strategy and where we're going. So having someone who understands the individual component parts and can speak to that lens so that we can come to the table and really work together and make sure that we are driving that organization forward.
You know, I want to cover another, go ahead. Sorry.
So I was just going to say just one point to that too, around the trust piece. And hiring someone who's not going to tell you what you want to hear, but someone who's going to be able to tell you what you need to hear, especially as a CEO.
Yeah, if your head of people or chief people officer agrees with every one of your decisions, hire a new chief.
You got a problem.
Yeah, that's not our job. Our job is to actually push back sometimes and kind of be a voice that isn't always going to be what you want to hear. That's our job. That's our role. And I want to stick with that theme as we talk about mistakes that startups often make. A lot of startups, especially in the early stages, they grow through their networks, right? Somebody comes out, they start a company, they hire their friends, they hire their friends' friends, they hire their friends' friends' friends. This often ends up creating monocultures that often are completely void of diversity. And I think as we're building organizations today at a time when we're dealing with the pandemic and having a reckoning with the pandemic of COVID-19 and also the pandemic of racism. And I think a lot of organizations are being much more, are having to kind of take a moment and think about their practices and where they have embedded inequity in their systems. And really, you're starting to see companies actually go, to a step of saying, we actually want to become an anti-racist company specifically. And that takes a lot of deliberate effort and a lot of deliberate thought. And so I think it's much harder to take a company that is, 50, 100 plus people that is, completely void of diversity or very little diversity, and then all of a sudden realize, what, we effed up. We need to change this. It's much harder to change it at that stage than it is embedding inclusive practices and really focusing on diversity early on. And so, Mike, I want to start with you. What advice do you have for founding teams that have really want to be deliberate and mindful of building diverse teams early on? What are some things they should be doing? What are some pitfalls they should look out for?
Yeah, I think you touched on one of the common ones, which is I know the previous people, and I trust them, and so it's just easier to do that. It's quicker. I think time is frequently the enemy of trying to build a diverse pipeline and being intentional around that. But I think that the criticality, like you said, is really important. Not always saying, I'll do it next time. This one I will say, yeah, it's okay, but I'll do it the next time, because that's a cycle that you can get into really quickly. At the end of the day, no one wants to be the first. Being the first is just really painful for you as an individual, and trying to get over that barrier gets harder and harder the bigger that you get. Do I want to be the first openly gay person to come into an organization? Not particularly. Knowing that culture is there is really important, and obviously that's a part of my role in what this work is, but making sure that you are focused on representation, and then at the same time that you are focused on how do we have difficult conversations along the way, being vulnerable, being honest, and calling out bad behavior from day one is really something that is going to help to set up that inclusion and equity aspect to balance out the focus on diversity.
Yeah. And LaRae, I'm curious to get your perspective here. What are some things that founding teams can do, proactively and deliberately to ensure they're building inclusive teams in the early stages?
Yeah, I think that latter part of what Mike said around the conversations that you're having, especially as it translates to the hiring process. So when you build in that time and you're having your deliberation meetings with the hiring manager, with the interviewers, are you really stopping to challenge what your biases may be? Are you having that honest and frank conversation? And building that muscle early on is what's actually going to thread the needle for diverse practices that you actually can, diverse and inclusive practices that you can leverage across the process, not just in recruiting, but if you're using that same form and that same way of challenging thinking, just for even how you're giving feedback. I think that's really what actually changes versus just being comfortable. And I think that's what it really is especially as you're hiring, what's easy, what's comfortable. Whenever you feel yourself falling into that space, that really should be the aha moment to stop and challenge yourself and actually probably redirect. If that's the case, you're not going to get the outcome. Be intentional with your diversity and inclusion of your practices.
Yeah. And Cristyn, I'm going to close with you. Are there any practices that you've seen in any organizations that you've worked for or with that were particularly effective that other companies should emulate?
I mean, nothing comes to mind as a top practice. I guess when I think about that for startups, the thing that's really nice about a startup is you have the opportunity to do this from the get-go. So, when I think about our founders, they were all white male founders, and I was the first person they hired. Yeah, to Mike's point, being the first kind of stinks, right? So, but you're able to then look at the pool of candidates and say, okay, we have 50 jobs we're going to hire for. How do we do this consciously? And how do we really make sure the pool is a diverse pool? So for a startup, to me, it's easier than any other business, because any other business is existing already. You're really having to shift the mindset, you're having to sell it, you're having to figure things out. So as it relates to a startup, honestly, there's no better environment for you to practice that. As long as you're in sync with the founders and the people that are going to allow you and partner with you to do that, then I think it's a real opportunity.
And I want to, one more topic I definitely want to make sure we're able to cover before we get to the Q&A is distributed work, remote work, right? So we're all happily going about our corporate lives. Just another year, 2020 is going to be the best year ever. You know, it's February, we're fired up. And then boom, you know, our world goes upside down with a global pandemic and everybody shifts from in-office to remote, who has the privilege of being able to do so really seemingly overnight. And we kind of rode that out a bit. And then we had a period of time where we talked about, you know, return to work plans, like let's again, the buzzword there. What's going to happen for return to work? How are we going to make that work? You know, and now we're talking about other things. It's not about, like, especially for those of us in the US, like we're probably not going to be safely back in an office in any numbers anytime soon. So what are your predictions on, you know, some companies have made announcements that they're going, you know, all remote or remote first. Some companies are taking more of a hybrid approach. You know, a lot of companies are taking a wait and see. Nobody is in a rush to get back into an office right now. How do you think this is going to play out? You know, Mike, I want to start with you, and we'll go around the group with this. But I'm curious to get your perspective. I imagine it'll be valuable for the viewers. Where do you think we're going to land with this whole notion of, you know, fully distributed, remote first, hybrid, and all the other options out there?
Yeah, I'm hearing more and more that the hybrid approach is something that people are focusing on. And I think at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of conversation about this is finally going to push us into remote 100% all the time. And for some companies, that's really effective, especially ones that have good communication practices and ability to do work. As we get to this stage, I'm talking to multiple leaders of organizations who are describing that feeling of just missing the hallway conversation, missing being able to be in the same place as someone. I think for me personally, I fall into that camp. I'd love to be 60% remote, 40% remote. I love the idea of that possibility, but I miss that in-person interaction. Granted, I'm a huge extrovert, but I like the engagement that goes with that. And I'm hearing that more and more, particularly as this draws on.
Cristyn, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Mike. I think, look, I think to some extent, a lot of people miss it, right? Even if you're an introvert, and even if you were working from home, we work with a ton of engineers, you know, in startups, and they were already working remotely, or they're comfortable, not being in the office. But there's a lot of people that really miss that, regardless of introvert, extrovert. And I think the benefit of having this experience, this collective experience of COVID, and the positive of it is that we're able to kind of see, okay, how are we going to do this well? Companies that weren't doing it before, they're learning how to trust their employees. They're like, oh, we couldn't possibly do that before. And now they're like, oh, wait, people are getting their work done. Yeah, because they're adults, you know? And so I think there's a benefit of learning how to experience that. And then whether that means hybrid or that means fully remote, I think that's up to each team to decide. But I think it at least gives us more insight to learn from it.
Yeah, and Cristyn, you make a really good point. I've seen, you know, multiple examples of CEOs who were personally, their own bias was against remote because they sucked at it. And so they thought, if I can't do it, surely my employees are not going to be effective at it. And this has been a good forcing function for them. Like, actually, I can do this and I can make this work. And my team can make this work. So I think it's actually changing a lot of the perceptions that executives had towards remote work.
Yeah, there's a lot of
LaRae, any closing thoughts on you?
No, I think it will get to the natural order of balance of things. And most importantly, I think to your last point, Lars, about letting go of that in-office culture and how important that is, we'll see the value of letting people kind of chart their own course and what they need in terms of that mix of either, you know, working in the office or working at home. And I actually think that for that reason, we'll probably have a much stronger workforce because of it.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I think that, you know, companies have made these shifts and I think the stage that we're at collectively right now in HR and people operations is like, what is the best answer for us? Is it remote first? Is it hybrid? Is it work from anywhere? If it's work from anywhere, does your pay change based on there's lots of macro, it's not just deciding like, hey, we're remote first. If you say you're remote first, there's lots of other touch points in the employee experience as it relates to comp and benefits and policies and communications. Every one of those decisions has tons of trickle down secondary decisions that have to be sorted. So that's what our world is right now on the HR and people side, is helping our leadership team think through that, but also engaging our employees to understand what is it they want, because they're all going through this differently. Some are dying to get back into an office. Others are, terrified at the idea of having to leave their home right now. And so I think we have to try to work to account for that, and where you can take your employees' considerations and needs and desires into effect and let that actually steer their experience. To me, that's the best practice I think all companies should be aiming for. I think we're at a point now, we're going to open this up to Q&A. So I'm going to actually jump back in the chat, because I know you've been feeding me with questions as we've been going. So I appreciate those. Again, if you have additional questions, just add that in the chat window, put question in all caps just so it'll stand out. And then we're going to hit as many of those as we can in the next 10 minutes. So you're going to watch me scroll through a chat function as I look for the first questions, which I'm almost at.
Lars, this is Amira.
Yes.
Jumping in to help you with this.
Thank you.
I've gathered all the questions for you.
Wonderful.
And I'm not going to give you a choice, I suppose, in which ones to answer. I'm going to choose a few of them for you. So someone asked, what is the most common mistake made by a new launch startup? I'm assuming as it relates to people and culture.
I think if I were to pick one, I think it would be the over-indexing just specifically on hiring and the recruiting function without actually thinking about your big picture talent strategy, and also defining your values and who you are in terms of your culture, having those honest, meaty conversations up front, even before you really start and engage on the hiring process, because that's going to set the tone for so much in terms of fit, not just skills, but also this person's likelihood of success in your organization. So I definitely would say not over-indexing too much on hiring in the beginning without thinking about the big picture.
Amazing. Any other mistakes you all, from your experience, want to help new founders or executives to avoid?
I think same problem as LaRae, but different lens. Not really factoring in people as individuals and as a collective into the way you're running your business strategy. Seeing individual roles, and I need a business development representative. Okay, why? What skill sets do you need to make your business strong? I've been spending a lot of time with a founder who went from 1 to 2 to 5, and really saying, stop focusing on the role. What do you need? What do you need to get out of? What do you need to stop doing? What skill set is going to complement you and make you successful? Get out of the business of titles. Get out of it. It doesn't matter. What do you actually want to make your business run?
I would just quickly throw out, saying we need to do it like insert your blue chip company. Like, why can't we do it like Google does it? Why can't we do it like Apple does it? Facebook does it this way. Why can't we do that? Like, you're not that. Like, you're you. You've got to work with the resources you have. And so I think founding teams can get smitten with blue chip companies really easy, and lose perspective on the fact that those companies are doing those because they're those blue chip companies.
Amen. Lars, you know what? I'm going to keep asking the questions because I think you're adding a lot of good perspective that you maybe didn't have as much a chance to do while you were
that's great.
moderating. Okay, great. So a different question, this is a little bit separate from what you all were discussing, but how do you all feel about HR contractors or consultants for startups and small firms? So how do you feel about it? And then as a follow-up, where, if you do support that, do you guide folks to look for that kind of external talent to support you?
So for contractors, I think, look, we look at employees and contractors similarly in a lot of ways. I think it's about what does the person bring to the table. First and foremost, finding the right person who has the right level of experience and knowledge to be a partner. A lot of times startups bring in somebody and they're like, okay, they have somebody who's in an administrative role doing the work. And that's not always ideal for where you want to go from a strategic perspective. I think as far as how you find them, similarly, I mean, look, you can go to an HR firm that's going to provide a contractor for you, or you can do it the same way you find your talent, which is posting the job out there. I love to do it through referrals. I think referrals are the best source for that. But those would be the ways I would go after contractor consultants in the space.
Okay, super. Thank you. Okay. And this is a really good question. What new inclusion strategies have you put in place in your organization to support your Black employees during this time?
For us, it was really a scenario where I won't index on the new, because this was something that we were already working at and being really intentional and thoughtful about really before we shifted in to everything that's happened across the past few months. But what it did elevate to us is the need to have more safe spaces for dialogue and conversation, and how do we create more forums for that, and also build the muscle for how you engage in those conversations, because in particular, not everyone is skilled or comfortable in how to deal or how to address. So for us, I would say that maybe that new practice area above and beyond what we were already doing was creating more channels and forums for these difficult conversations to actually happen.
And do you mind me digging into that and asking, what were those channels? Were they digital channels? Did you organize forums that were live? Did you have facilitators? Yep. Like, what did that look like?
It was both and. So we did a live fireside chat. We'll continue that on through the year, where we actually engaged our professionals of color. They had a similar panel. Our CEO talked. We've also done smaller subsets of this with just general teams coming together. So we use both big and small live. All virtual in terms of having the conversation.
Okay, super helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Mike.
We did something fairly similar. We're a smaller organization, so we had an all company approach for 100 people looked a little easier for us to pull off. So we did a couple of those more regularly. Started sending more communications with resources that we crowdsourced from the community to be able to have these difficult conversations. Really acknowledging the place we were and what we were trying to do over time from an inclusion and an equity standpoint. We already had a standing DEI committee, and so that was a good channel for us to say, all right, we're going to drive these actions forward and put out certain steps that were going to help us to get there. We had an all-staff conference and made the relationship building and inclusion aspects really a highlight of what that staff conference looked like, so that it was a developmental area that everybody would engage in over the course of their time, and then started introducing consistent vocabulary so that we were talking when it comes to recruitment. We'll come back online. How are we approaching this within our talent pipeline? But then how are we making sure that there is inclusion within what we do once that person is here? Installing career matrices so that there is a clear career path, installing compensation bands that didn't exist before so that we have transparency when it comes to equity and pay. A lot of the things that you hear about, but we are now taking that action to do. And so this was part of our effort to do that, and then leading by example so that we're role modeling at the top to say, we're going to root out the bad actors. We're going to have difficult conversations with people who are not aligned with our values, and making clear that we don't stand for that behavior to create more psychological safety.
Yeah, love that, Mike. So important. Okay, Lars, last question is for you. Studies show that even when employers seek to hire for cognitive diversity, when it comes to the final decision, they nevertheless continue to default to hiring people who think like them. What practicalities can be employed to address this? And then as a side note, who painted those 6 snowboards hanging on the wall behind you? Are snowboards? I don't know.
Well, the last one first. They're skateboards, and these are actual decks. So summer boards I used to ride years and years ago when my knees didn't creak. And I have one skateboard that's actually painted by my daughters. That's not directly behind me; it's off to the side. So I do have one custom painted job. I think the question on cognitive diversity, you can replace cognitive with any level of diversity and ask the same question, and it's the same answer. Like, inclusive hiring practice don't just occur. They don't. You'd like to think they do, and despite good intentions, they just don't. You have to engineer them in a way that You're gathering feedback, you're structuring the interview, you're creating consistency in terms of the interviewers and the areas they're probing and the ways that you're gathering feedback. All of those mechanisms have to be in place and they have to be consistent across all hires. I think that a lot of companies, you still see a lot of people leaning on the BS culture fit, a reason to ding people, right? Oh, they weren't a good culture fit. BS, what does that mean? You should never, none of you watching this should allow somebody to not hire somebody because they said they were not a good culture fit. Challenge that 100%. Why? What do you mean by that? Tell me more. If they can't give a specific and tangible example, it doesn't count. And so I think that, again, whether you're talking about cognitive bias, whether you're talking about, sexual orientation, whether you're talking about race, ethnicity, age, any variable, you have to be deliberate around how you engineer your interview process so that people don't find, loopholes to go with what's comfortable or go with what's familiar, that is the enemy of building inclusive teams.
Amen. Okay, thank you so much. That's beautiful. We are at time. I am going to just really quickly thank everyone who's on this panel. Lars, Mike, Cristyn, and LaRae, you each brought so much thoughtfulness and knowledge and practical advice for everyone here, and I'm so thankful to you. I am going to just show everybody really quickly what's coming up next. Tomorrow morning, we have an incredible session called Beyond the Checkbox, Designing an Equitable and Anti-Racist Workplace. So we're gonna go deeper into a lot of the things this group of people already shared with you, followed by a session on internal communications challenges, how to detect them and overcome them. And then on Wednesday, we have an amazing panel on great managers being the secret weapon to loyal and engaged employees. Finally, don't forget to go download the Culture Track Guide at manifesta.co/startupweek. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.